Ja, hallo aus Innsbruck. Ich bin hier auf der BTC23 und heute hat auch Michael Saylor gesprochen. Er war über Videocall zugeschaltet und hat das Interview mit Nico Jilch geführt. Dabei habe ich dann angefangen zu filmen, als bei Michael Saylor der Fernseher hinten ausgegangen ist. Dann ist er wieder angegangen und dann kam sein Apple TV und dann spielte so ein bisschen unpassend im Hintergrund der Apple TV da sowas ab. Und dadurch, dass er auch oft Apple erwähnt hatte während des Talks, war es irgendwie lustig, dass Apple sich so präsent da in seinen Vortrag einmischt. Und deswegen habe ich angefangen zu filmen und habe dann gemerkt, oh, das ist doch interessant, was er da zu sagen hat. Ich filme einfach ein bisschen weiter, dann letztendlich sind 12 Minuten Videomaterial entstanden und die wollte ich mit euch teilen, weil da wirklich ein paar wichtige Infos drin sind. Vor allem am Anfang erklärt er noch, warum Bitcoin ja wichtig ist als für Unternehmen, für große Unternehmen auf dem Balance Sheet zu haben, was noch nicht möglich ist aktuell. Große Unternehmen haben noch nicht die Infrastruktur, um Bitcoin wirklich zu kaufen. Ich meine, wie will man es auch machen in einem großen Unternehmen? Soll dann eine Person im Unternehmen, die Private Keys haben, das Wallet haben oder wie soll das funktionieren? Da gibt es eben noch nicht die Infrastruktur. Und die wird jetzt aber kommen mit dem Bitcoin ETF, also mit mehreren Bitcoin ETFs. Und das wird einen großen Impact haben. Und im zweiten Teil geht er auch noch darauf ein, wie es jetzt ist für uns. Hier Bitcoin steht bei 24.000 Euro. Wie es dann sein wird, wie man sich an diese Zeit erinnern wird. Und ja, wir werden sehen. Es ist verdammt billig gerade. Und er hat sogar gemeint, es lohnt sich gerade einfach bei McDonald's zu arbeiten und jeden Cent in Bitcoin zu stecken. Aber das werden wir dann ja sehen, wer das tatsächlich gemacht hat und wer sich noch ein bisschen ausgeruht hat, so wie ich das gerade tue. Ja, deswegen viel Spaß mit dem Video und ich hoffe, da kommen ein paar interessante Gedanken für euch dazu, die ihr noch nicht so hattet. Also Saylor kann ich immer sehr empfehlen, ist ja eine große Koryphäe im Bitcoin-Raum. Aber auch er ist erst seit ein paar Jahren oder seit 2, 3 Jahren im Bitcoin-Space. Also auch er wurde erst 2021 georangepillt oder so. Deswegen, ihr seid nicht zu spät dran. Ich bin nicht zu spät dran. Ähm, Bitcoin hat noch eine lange Reise vor sich und ja, ich glaube, es lohnt sich für jeden dabei zu sein. Naja, viel Spaß im Video.
Even in the long term, after all this near-term adoption and the bull markets run out, if you roll the clock forward a decade, 2 decades, you can expect that over the long term, over a century, if the S&P index appreciates 7% a year, because the money supply is expanding 7% a year, Bitcoin should appreciate 14% a year. So Bitcoin is an appreciating asset on your treasury. Let's just say, I'm being very conservative, 14% a year, whereas you're getting 14% tax deferred, no tax, whereas if you hold the sovereign debt, you might get 5% taxable. So you're getting an after-tax yield of 3% on sovereign debt, and you're getting a tax-deferred yield of 14% on the Bitcoin in the conservative case. And then your alternative is the competitor is owning buildings and land, but as I pointed out, it's not liquid treasury asset. So I think that this FASB decision means that Bitcoin can now be a treasury reserve asset for mega corporations. And that's going to drive and open the door for corporations, instead of investing all of their treasury assets in sovereign debt, they can start to allocate to Bitcoin. But here's a bigger idea. The bigger idea is Apple can't actually keep their cash flow right now. Apple generates hundreds of billions of dollars of cash flow, but they can't keep it because they know that the debt is negative yielding. So what they do is they buy their stock back, or they do acquisitions with it, or they dividend it out. Those are the 3 uses of cash of a public company. You either do an acquisition, you dividend out the cash, or you buy your stock back. And you go to negative working capital. So you borrow money instead of accumulate capital. And if I borrow $100 billion, then this dynamic of negative real yield works the opposite way. Instead of having a negative real yield of 4% on 100 billion, I have the positive yield because I borrowed 100 billion, right? And then I bought my stock with it, which is appreciating at 14%. So the big idea here is you could see a change in the way people view treasury theory, and companies start to keep their cash flows and invest them in Bitcoin because they can, instead of surrendering all their cash flows and running without any capital.
It's funny that you would mention Apple, because Apple TV has taken over the screen that's behind you and has replaced the picture that you had with commercials for its shows. So are you saying that companies are now able to use Bitcoin basically as their savings account, as their piggy bank, and that something like this wasn't even possible before? And what about central banks?
Hold on one second. No free commercials for Apple.
I hope Apple stock didn't just crash.
Yeah, they'll do okay. Coming back to the issue of central banks, I think that the third catalyst, before we get to central banks, is just banks in general, right? Spot ETF is first on your checklist. Fair value accounting is second on your checklist, and then the embrace of companies like Deutsche Bank and Santander and JP Morgan and Bank of America and the like. That's third on the list. And I think as we start to see those banks step up and become custodians, first they'll be custodians, then they will actually begin offering financing and collateral, and you accept Bitcoin as collateral. And then you'll start to see a whole set of Bitcoin derivatives and new products. Instead of just pure Bitcoin, you might see Bitcoin integrated with fixed income offerings, Bitcoin with volatility hedging. You might see Bitcoin-backed insurance plans, Bitcoin-backed bonds, all sorts of other Bitcoin-backed securities that will be banked. And that will eventually ripple. So I think with regard to sovereigns, we already know some sovereigns are buying Bitcoin and they're mining Bitcoin. We've seen announcements from El Salvador, from Oman, from Bhutan, right, from the Emirates, and so that's spreading. But I think that'll continue to spread. But the next probably big support will come from sovereign wealth funds. And the sovereign wealth funds, first they'll take positions via the spot ETFs, and then they'll take positions via other companies, right? As companies embrace Bitcoin and put it on their treasury. Look, if Apple Computer just stopped dividending out their stock or stopped dividending out their cash flows and just started buying Bitcoin with their cash flows, the nature of the company changes, right? And any company that's a cash cow that starts accumulating assets in Bitcoin becomes one part power company, one part Bitcoin company, one part software company, one part Bitcoin company. And the degree to which you're a Bitcoin company versus a food company or an ice cream company or a real estate company just comes down to the portion of your enterprise value which is based upon the P&L versus the portion of your enterprise value which is based on your balance sheet. Right, and Berkshire Hathaway is an example of a company where a lot of it's based on its balance sheet. For example, substantially all of the success of Berkshire Hathaway is due to an investment in Apple stock in the past 10 years. And the returns of Apple stock for Berkshire Hathaway dwarf every other decision made in the last 50 years. Like nothing else that Berkshire Hathaway did mattered except to the extent that it allowed them to make the Apple investment. And so that, you know, you could think of them as like a big tech stock in a way, because they reoriented their balance sheet to one big tech asset, Apple. I think we'll see the same with regard to corporations and investors with Bitcoin. And countries typically are the most conservative, so it'll be the small countries. It'll be the nimble operations. It'll be the El Salvadors and the Madeiras and the Bhutans and the UAEs and the Omans. They'll move first. And the large countries, they'll be more conservative for good reason. They don't have to move, right? And they'll take their time getting there. But that's why you should think about this as coming in layers and waves. You know, the first layer, the second layer. The next step will be gold funds that own a bunch of gold will sell half their gold and buy Bitcoin with it. And then hedge funds that have no Bitcoin will allocate 1%, and then 5%, and then 10%. And then companies that have no Bitcoin will allocate 5% and 10%. And you don't, you know, there's this joke, right? Maybe it's Einstein said it. The reason we need time is so that everything doesn't happen all at once. So it's, you know, you might be frustrated as not happening too fast, but you don't want it to happen too fast, right? If it happened too fast, Bitcoin would go to, if I said to you, guess what? Everybody watched Michael Saylor's talk and everybody on Wall Street agrees with him, and so they all bought Bitcoin. Tomorrow morning you would wake up and Bitcoin would be $8 million a coin. And what would you think? You would think, dang, I should have bought more when I wish it didn't happen so fast. You don't want it to happen that fast. Right now, we're in this very ideal situation. We'll remember this time period fondly. We'll look back at this. Bitcoin trading at 26,000. We all know what's about to happen. We all know corporations are going to adopt it. Wall Street's going to adopt it. We know the ETFs are coming. We know the capitalists are coming. We know everyone's going to wake up and figure this out, but they don't have to go to buy it yet. So you know the future, but it has not manifested itself in the price. You're going to wish, you know, for these days back, because these are the days where you can work in a job at McDonald's and you can make whatever X dollars an hour and go buy Bitcoin, and one day, you know, you'll look back and say, I was actually making the equivalent of $8,000 an hour at McDonald's, right? And you know, if you actually are smart enough to work at McDonald's and buy Bitcoin right now, in 10 years, you're going to realize it was the most lucrative thing you did your entire life. And when everybody else embraces these big three ideas, when the banks custody Bitcoin, when the spot ETF is here, when companies are using Bitcoin in their treasury, then that opportunity is lost to you. Instead of buying Bitcoin at 25,000, you're buying Bitcoin at $1 million. And here's the way you should think of it. You're taking a 40x pay cut. You see, whatever you're making right now, it's going to be worth 40x less. So take what you're making right now, multiply by 40. That's what you get paid, right, in fiat, in order to use Bitcoin as a treasury asset and keep one foot in the fiat world, because you understand the future, but the rest of the world, 99% of the world, hasn't caught up with you. And I guess what I'm saying is, I think they all know. I mean, a lot of them know. Some of them don't, but a lot of them know. But I sat with a guy's got $1 trillion in capital under management, and he couldn't buy the Bitcoin even if he wanted to. Like, he couldn't, because he doesn't have the accounting systems, the on-ramps, the regulatory wrapper. So there are people out there that have more money than you, that may actually perceive the same thing you perceive. They can't buy it yet. You should count yourself lucky if you actually have the ability to acquire it right now, right? Because you jumped through the hoops, you got KYC'd on a crypto exchange, because you've got a relationship, right? You have an advantage. The advantage is for a window of time. It will actually never be this good again, in my opinion.
Well, we might not be able